Okay, so if I recall correctly, we were on page 17. Does that sound right to you? Now we're finally getting to the nitty-gritty of it. We're going to talk about making decisions. As indicated earlier, there are 57 different types of decision entries and 10 entries involving assumptions about competitive actions that rivals are likely to take. So remember, unless you change it, those assumptions about the efforts of your rival are all going to be based on their effort from the previous period. Do you think that's necessarily a good plan to leave that? No. Let's see. In some cases, entries for the same decision type, like selling price or advertising or delivery times, are required for each of the 4 geographic regions of the world market. Each of the decision pages displays projected outcomes of your decision entries. And so of those 57, not all of them have to be repeated for every region, but a lot of them do. Each of the decision pages displays the projected outcomes of your decision entries. So let's talk about projected outcomes. Does anyone remember what SWAG stands for? Yeah, scientific wild ass guess. And that's exactly what these projections are. Students will say, well, wait a minute, it said I was going to sell 2 million pairs of shoes. And I'm like, that's a projection. If everyone else behaved the way you thought, and you did the things that you're doing, that's what would have happened. But the problem is, either you didn't accurately predict what your competitors were going to do, or you didn't try to predict it at all. And so those are just projections. They're not guarantees. The first time you visit a decision entry page, you should take time to explore and digest all the information. I know how great you guys are at following instructions. If you feel the need for assistance or additional information while you're working on a page, click the help button on the top right. First biggest predictor of whether people will succeed on this is if they've read the player's guide. What do you think the number 2 is? The help button. I mean, this is something, if you put the work into it, you can do fine, right? So don't freak out, just use the help button. The help documents provide detailed entry-by-entry guidance, including important cause and effect relationships, explanations of all on-page calculations, and decision-making tips. Totally ignoring the help information is unwise. Did you guys catch that? Totally ignoring the help information is unwise. No decision entry for the current year is considered final until the deadline set by your instructor for the decision round arrives. BSG considers the last set of decision entries saved prior to the decision round as final. It is critical that you and your co-managers save your entries before the deadline. Folks, I cannot reset the round to allow for late submissions. I already told you that, can't do it. Now, Mr. Stoner figured out something earlier. When he's out playing around with this and he's saving decisions, is it saving just for him? No, it's saving for the entire team, right? And so do not go out there and fiddle around with this unless you are the one designated by the team to enter the decisions. In fact, what I would recommend, if you can, and it's a seated class, you should be able to find a time to get together physically to enter these things. And then don't mess with it. By the way, if you don't get around to putting new decisions in, what do you think happens? It just carries over the decisions from last time. That may be good, it may be bad, who knows, right? Workforce compensation and training, there are 6 different types of entries on the first decision entry page you will encounter. Number 1, how much to raise or lower the base pay of workers at each production facility, so that's going to be per region. Whether and how much to change their incentive payment, the dollar size of fringe benefits, how much to spend on training workers in best practices, approximately what ratio of production workers to supervisors you want to have at each facility, and what percentage increase in salaries and benefits to grant production supervisors. All those are by region. Okay, now, some of these are going to have obvious answers. If you lower the base pay of workers and you don't do anything else, what's that going to do to their productivity? Yeah, lower it. When I was a kid, I was a grocery sacker. On Sundays, I got time and a half. And then On the next union contract, we got hosed over, and then I was getting $1 an hour premium pay. Do you think my Sunday afternoons became more relaxed? Absolutely. And then my boss told me, he says, I hear you're putting forth less effort because of the reduced pay. I said, that's true. And he says, you know I could fire your ass. I said, yes, but me at my slowest is still better than your next best guy. And he said, yeah. He walked away. Okay, it definitely will lower your productivity if you do that. Whether and how much to raise each worker's incentive pay per pair produced. And we're going to see it's not just per pair produced, it has to be per good pair produced, because otherwise your people will churn out crap. The dollar size of the fringe benefits package that the company will provide to production workers at each facility. What are fringe benefits? They're not French benefits. I know sometimes people think that.
Picnics.
Okay, so that's one of them.
That's those stuff.
The company picnic. What else? So we've talked about money, giving people money for either salary or incentive. What other sorts of things can you get from your employer?
Dental.
Yeah, dental, health.
For the Jello of the Month Club.
Jello, yeah, oh my goodness. Yeah, if you want to piss off your entire workforce, give them a non-monetary bonus of something like that. And if you don't believe me, just watch, what is it, Christmas Vacation?
Yeah.
Yeah, great movie. Okay, back to the story. So these fringe benefits, one of the reasons that I stick around at this joint is because we have great benefits. I can see a doctor for $10. The university is contributing 100% to my pension plan. And by the way, pension plans are rare. So these are things that help you to attract and retain employees. Approximately what ratio of production workers to supervisors you want to have at each facility? Now let's talk about the impact of that. What would happen if you had no production supervisors at all? What's the nature of man? We've discussed this before. People they're lazy. Yeah. And so if nobody's watching them, what's going to happen? Not much is going to get done. Now, what you say, well, wait a minute, that means we should hire a bunch of supervisors. What's the problem with that idea? Yeah. And my guys would always point out to me that I didn't produce a damn dime. And I would go back to my office and laugh because I knew that if I didn't go around with my sharp stick, they wouldn't produce a damn dime, right? I didn't literally have a sharp stick. It's rhetorical. I know, you were excited. Oh yes. Hey, if we get to the end of the semester and we've got extra time, I will tell you crazy things my employees did. And you'll be amazed, but it will help prepare you for dealing with your future employees. Okay, so what percentage increase in salaries and benefits to grant production supervisors? Who do you think does a better job of watching the workers? A poorly paid supervisor or a well-paid one? Poorly paid one does? Oh, well-paid, right? Okay, so have you ever heard anyone say this? They don't pay me enough for that? Yeah, I think we've all said that at one time or another. And so I wanted to, I had a guy that I knew had a gun in his toolbox, right? And this is Texas, right? And so they told me that one of my things that I needed to do was to disarm this guy before I fired him. My response? I don't get paid enough to do that. And so we ended up bringing in an off-duty policeman who was very nice and unloaded the .44 Magnum and handed it to my worker and said that he would mail the bullets to him. It just all worked out well. Okay, let's see. Dollar size of the compensation package paid to production workers relative to the regional average directly affects worker productivity. Now, why would that be? First of all, we've talked about if you pay people poorly, they're going to slack off. But over time, if people find out you have the best pay and benefits in the region, who's going to come to you?
Everyone.
Yeah, the good workers for sure, right? And that means that you can keep good workers and you can get rid of lousy workers. So you'll actually have a better class of worker working for you. I'll give you an example. Costco pays greater than the average market wage. If you go to Costco, and I'm not going to name these other places, but you've been to some of these other places where people are changing diapers in the aisle and whatnot, and you ask someone there for help, what's the typical response? Right? What happens at Costco? They'll help, right? It's a big difference. Okay. Let's see. Work productivity and the percentage of pairs rejected due to work defects in workmanship. Expenditures for best practices training have 4 highly positive benefits in all facilities. Put a big star by that. Because if something has 4 highly positive benefits, do you think maybe you should be investing in it? Yeah. Number 1, helping curb reject rates. Number 2, helping improve SQ ratings for both your branded and your private label. Number 3, curtailing materials waste and potentially lowering materials costs at the facility by as much as 20% annually. And 4, increasing worker productivity. I don't know if you've ever seen how they make shoes, but they've got this big piece of material and then they go around and they cut the pieces out of that material. If you have more highly skilled workers, do you think that they could get more pieces out of the same piece of material? Absolutely. Annual increases of 1% or more in worker productivity at the North American facility, where productivity is presently 5,000 pairs per worker per year, and at the Asia Pacific, where it's just under 3,500 per workers per year, holds the potential for meaningful savings in labor costs over time. All of the benefits of current year spending for best practices training are reflected in supporting calculations of productivity, materials cost, reject rates, SQ ratings each time you change a decision entry, allowing you to emulate the immediate cost effectiveness of such expenditures. So you're going to get a projection, and you can play around with it and try to find that optimal. But remember, it's a projection. It's a scientific wild ass guess. It is not a guaranteed thing like SQ. Expenditures to achieve a comparatively low ratio of production workers to supervisors and pay supervisory personnel higher than average salaries also helps boost production worker productivity. Oh my goodness, does that look like a hint? I think that looks like a hint. So write hint next to that. Factors that affect worker productivity. Annual base pay increases. Annual increases in pay of 2% or more lead to higher levels of productivity, chiefly because the higher pay scales help companies attract and retain with better skills and work habits. So we've already talked about that. The maximum base pay increase in any 1 year is 15%. Do you think 15% is probably a reasonable thing for you to be throwing out there? Probably not. Cuts in base pay are allowed, up to a maximum of 10% in any 1 year, but they will tend to decrease worker productivity unless the base pay cut is offset with increased incentive payments. So in my hometown, there were 3 basic industries. There was dynamite, where my dad worked, there were the cheese plants, and then there were the bed spring plants. Dynamite and the cheese plant were by the hour. The bed spring plant worked on this incentive plan like they're talking here. And so they would get a lower hourly base rate, but then they would get paid based on how many springs they turned out on the spring making machines. So when someone starts out, how do you think they do? First of all, have you ever made a bed spring on a machine? No, most people haven't, right? And so when you start the job, you're pretty lousy at it. What do you think happens then? Goes up, and then these people are making a lot of money. But about the time they hit my age, 50-ish, if they have not worked themselves into a supervisory role by that time, what do you think starts to happen? Oh, come on. Yeah, you start to trail off. Now, do you think people's egos allow them to stick around when they're no longer the top earner in the place? There are a lot of people that retired and just went, of course, most of them had a farm on the side anyway, so they went right back to that. So this is how the incentive pay works. It's apparently a good deal because they're telling you here that you can cut base pay and increase your incentive. The next one is how much emphasis is placed on incentive compensation. The larger the percentage of total compensation that comes from piecework incentives, the larger the gain in worker productivity. However, incremental gains in productivity become progressively smaller and top out altogether once incentive pay reaches 25% of total compensation. I'm going to write it in economics thought up here. Diminishing returns. What do you think diminishing returns means? How does it apply to this? Let me read it to you again. The larger the percentage that comes from piecework, the larger the gain. However, the incremental gains, that's the extra gain you get for another percentage worth of incentive pay, they become progressively smaller and top out altogether once incentive pay reaches 25% of total compensation.
Basically saying that you still need to pay your employees well, because if you get to a point where incentive pay is too much of the compensation, it's I don't get paid enough for this, and you're not getting paid base enough, so you're losing productivity and money after that point.
So let's think about it this way. If there are different things you can spend money on to get worker productivity up. This one has diminishing marginal returns. Would you pour all of your money then into incentive pay? No. So you're better off to spread things around. When we get to SQ, it'll be obvious. We're going to have multiple things, multiple ways you can improve your SQ, but they all have diminishing returns. And so that points us to the wisdom of doing a little of all of them, because the incremental gain for each is larger than it would be if you threw all the money into one of the ways to get your SQ rating up. Does that make sense? By the way, do you think that in life we see something similar to this? We have something called the diminishing marginal utility of consumption. I grew up poor, and my first job after graduation, I was making $37,200 a year. The year was 1994. I was making more than anybody in my family had ever made as an engineer. Now, and by the way, that was real money then. Now, what do you think I thought? And by the way, do you think I was tremendously happier as a result of having that money? Oh, hell yeah. My wife and I rolled into Duncan, Oklahoma, and I said, welcome to the middle class, baby, right? Because there we were. Now, and I'm like, woohoo! And I got to thinking, you know what? I'll bet I would be twice as happy if I were making twice as much money. Do you think it's true? You will learn. I hope you will learn. Because what that means is that you're going to have the opportunity to have your salary doubled, right? I hope you'll have the opportunity to learn this. But here's what I can tell you. It was like 5 years later, I'm making like $78,000. And I can tell you this, I wasn't much, if any, happier. In fact, I was a little less happy because I had lost hope that additional money would bring me additional happiness, right? Does that make sense? Now, as my dissertation advisor always said, the marginal utility of an extra dollar is always positive. In other words, if they would throw you extra money, it would increase your utility. But right now, you guys, I assume, have somewhere between jack and squat, right? If I threw $10 at you, it would make you far more happy than if someone threw $10 at me would make me happy, right? Because I've got like a real job. Does that make sense? Okay, that's diminishing marginal utility of consumption. Total annual compensation of workers relative to industry average levels in the total geographic region. So basically, like everything else, if you are above the average, you're going to do better. What do you think if you're below the average? Oh, come on, Mr. Stoner. You're going to do worse. Special note, the worker productivity figures shown on the page are projections. Swags. Not certainties, because there's no way for you to know in advance what your competitors are going to do. And after all, you are comparing against the industry average. Next, we are on to the amount the company spends annually on best practices training. Productivity benefits from spending progressively more dollars on training are subject to diminishing marginal returns. In other words, the benefits of spending another $500 per worker on best practices training are smaller than spending the first $500. And then the third is less than the second. And so this gets back to the idea of there is wisdom. Don't put all your money into incentive pay. Take some of that money, put it into best practices. Don't take all your money and put it into best practices. Take some of that and put it into the base pay, right? If and when the resulting productivity gains become too small to justify spending additional sums in upcoming years, you can cut back spending on training without losing any of the previous buildup in productivity. That is not like corporate social responsibility. Do you remember what happens in corporate social responsibility when you stop doing that stuff? Do those ooey gooey feelings stick around for your clients? No. Why is this different?
People have already learned.
Yeah, the people have learned, right? And because you're paying them well, they stick around. Does that make sense? The number of models workers must assemble at a given facility. Workforce productivity decreases as the number of models being assembled goes up. This is because of the somewhat production assembly methods that are used for different models. If you've only got me making one thing all day long, do you think I would get really good at it? Absolutely. If you get a chance, go to YouTube, and they've got all these Pakistani manufacturing operation videos. And there'll be some guy, and he'll be working with white hot glowing steel, and he will not have on shoes or safety glasses or anything like that. And yet he will be able to beat this piece of white hot iron into a product that you would recognize and be proud to own. Now, if I was instead asking this guy one day to make a horse cart, and the next day to make a washing machine, and the day after that to make a computer, do you think he would be that good at any of those things? No. And so the more models that you have, the worse your productivity is going to be. Now, this is where my engineers and my finance people are like, oh, hey, well, then we'll just do fewer models. What do we talk about the attractiveness of your product? What's better, more models or fewer models? More models. Everything in business and everything in life is an optimization. Too much of the time we think of life as, it's a maximization. He who dies with the most toys wins. Is that bullshit? You get a little closer to being dead, you'll feel like I do, and you're like, no, that's not right, right? That's not the way this works. So, the optimization here. We are balancing the decline in worker productivity against the increase in the attractiveness of our products. Do you think there's an optimal point that where those things kind of balance out? Yeah, and it's your job to find that. Higher supervisory salaries are relative to the regional average because you're going to get higher caliber supervisors, which enhances the productivity of the production workers they supervise. I inherited a worker who sat at his machine, and he's supposed to be paying attention to his machine, but instead he was reading. At first he was reading novels. And I told him, you're not supposed to be reading, you need to be watching the machine. He said, no problem, boss. Next day I come around, he has a pornographic magazine. I said, I thought I told you not to read at your machine. He says, I'm not reading. I said, I think you're missing the point here, right? Now, the lesser supervisor, the one that came before me, he let the guy read and look at porn all he wanted to at his machine. So do you see how having a higher caliber of supervisor can improve productivity? A smaller ratio of production workers to supervisors The fewer workers the supervisory staff are assigned to supervise, the better they're able to quickly correct sloppy assembly practices and lax worker attention to detail, and the more time they have to police the best use of assembly practices by production workers. But once again, it's an optimization because, as you pointed out earlier, Mr. Crawford, you run the risk of having too high of a cost. And so what you're always trying to think about is the cost and the benefit. What's the cost of the additional supervisors versus the benefit that they will bring? The use of new equipment as opposed to refurbished equipment, even if the refurbished equipment has been recently purchased. New equipment has features that enhance the footwear assembly process so they can work things faster. Folks, I can tell you that that is absolutely true. When we would buy a new machine, and we'd had one that we'd had for like 30 years, and we're like, wow, this thing can produce like 2-3 times as much. Now, we could have sent the old one out to get revamped, and it might have improved its productivity, maybe 20%, but not the 2 to 3 multiplier that we got on the new machines. By the way, which do you think is more expensive, new equipment or refurbished? Yeah, new is more expensive. And so it's another one of those things where you're going to have to balance off the costs and the benefits. Whether production improvement option D has been installed at the factory, this option increases worker productivity by 50%. We're going to get to these improvement options here in a bit. Okay, now down at the bottom, there is no reason to believe that over the next several years, worker productivity can be substantially improved at both facilities if managers aggressively pursue productivity gains. Worker productivity is important because it determines the size of the workforce needed to staff facility operations. There is reason to believe that it can be substantially improved. Do you think you should try? I think that's another hint. By the way, more productive workers are turning out more shoes per worker. What does that do to the number of workers you have to have? Pushes it down. And what does that do to the number of supervisors you have to have? Pushes it down. So this is a good thing. Okay, now we're on to branded footwear production. There are 5 types of decision entries involved in producing branded footwear. And once again, these are all going to be for all 4 regions. You have to do different ones. Or you could do them all the same, whatever you want to do. The percentage of superior materials used, the number of model styles to be produced, how much to spend on enhancing the styling features for each model style, how much to spend on the facility's ongoing TMQ Six Sigma programs. Those were the quality improvement programs. 5, the number of branded pairs to be manufactured. These 5 decision categories are fairly straightforward, but you can always click on the help if you want additional details. But here are the things to keep in mind. First, there is some degree of uncertainty about prices for standard and superior materials. Remember, we said that if everybody jumps onto superior materials, what's going to happen to the price of it? It's going to go up. What's going to happen to the price of standard materials? It's going to go down, and vice versa. Shifting prices for standard and superior materials, which are not known in advance, cause actual costs for materials that differ up or down from the projected materials cost shown on the page. The next one, you can immediately see the impact of the company's SQ rating when you enter decisions for superior materials usage, expenditures for enhanced styling and features, and expenditures for TQM Six Sigma. SQ ratings are not a swag. They are known with certainty. Benefits of progressively higher expenditures for styling features and TQM Six Sigma programs are subject to diminishing marginal returns. In other words, the incremental gains from increasing spending on styling features from $5,000 to $10,000 will exceed the benefits of increasing from $10,000 to $15,000. Likewise, boosting TQM Six Sigma spending from 50 cents per pair to $1 per pair is going to have a bigger incremental benefit than boosting from $1 to $1.50. So, should you throw all of your money into higher expenditures for styling features? No. Should you throw it all into TQM Six Sigma? No. Because the incremental gain you get for the first dollar spent is greater in each of this category than if you stacked them up and put them into one category. The amount of the company's cumulative spending for TQM Six Sigma programs over a period of years has a bigger impact than current year spending. That's because the benefits of such programs come from an ongoing effort over a period of years rather than a short-term or on-again, off-again effort to squeeze out results. This is very similar to the corporate social responsibility. Now you say, well, wait a minute, Why shouldn't I just I could just choose between TQM, Six Sigma, and corporate social responsibility. And my response to you would be, TQM, Six Sigma gets you real, tangible benefits. Does the spending on, corporate social responsibility? No. Some combinations, okay, so talking about improving your SQ, some combinations entail lower cost per pair than others. That's what I was telling you earlier. If there are 3 ways to improve SQ, don't put all your money on one of them. Spread the money around. It's better to spend a little in each category than to lump it all into one category. In deciding how many branded model styles to include in your company's product line, you need to be alert to the costs associated with changing the production line from making one model style to another. Anybody here ever work in manufacturing? Okay, let me tell you how this works. Anytime that you change the product that you're making, you have to go through, first of all, you have to tear down the machines from the product they were previously making, and then you have to set them up to produce new stuff. Do you think this takes time? Yeah. Are you producing anything while you're doing this tear down and then set up? No. And so what we end up with is, if we have only one model of shoes, we would leave the machines set up as they are. No cost for setup and tear down, just the first time, right? But what is only having one pair of shoes going to do to the attractiveness of your company? All right? And so once again, it's an optimization when you think about the number of models and styles to carry. To switch production over from one model to another takes anywhere from 2 hours to 5 hours of setup time, depending on the styling features of the various model styles, usually done between each day's work shifts. Annual production run setup costs per facility for branded footwear are $1 million for 50 models, $2 million for 100 models, $3.25 million for 150 models, $4.5 million for, and you guys can read those for yourselves. And so you can see that if you only have 50 models, you're spending 1/15 of what you would be spending for 500 models. Now, 50 is 1/10 of 500, and so there is some diminishing marginal return to having, so from a setup perspective, it's going to cost you more and more as you get bigger, not just in a linear fashion. Broadening your company's product line with more models can have a strongly positive effect on unit sales and market share, but the sales enhancing effect of more models also carries a potentially sizable impact on production costs per pair. And so what it really boils down to is, once again, should you be maximizing the number of models? No. Should you be minimizing the number of models? No. It's an optimization problem. It's an optimization problem. If a major element of your company's strategy is to have a broad product line, you can combat the added cost per pair associated with production run setup by investing in production improvement option B that reduces production run setup cost by 50% and or by expanding the production facility. Producing large numbers of shoes reduces the fixed cost per shoe, but it might also drive up your inventory. And so you've got to be careful on that one too. So one of the things that I ran into when I first got into manufacturing is that we would have an order for 4 of something, and we'd be making a batch of 50. And when I asked, why are we making 50? We only need 4. And they would say, oh, because you want to spread that setup cost, which is the fixed cost. You want to spread that over more units of production to make these things have a lower cost. To which I would say, what are you going to do with the other 46? What's the answer?
Samples.
Say again?
Samples.
Oh, what?
Store.
Yeah, you're going to store it. It's going to wind up in your inventory. You are trading off this low fixed cost per item with now having those things on the shelf. We had stuff on the shelf going back to 1957. The year was 1994. Do you think we were doing a good job of monitoring our inventory? No. Factors that determine reject rates. Number one, the size of incentive payment per non-defective pair. So that incentive payment not only is for productivity, but you can also help drive up your non-defective pairs produced. Spending for TQM, Six Sigma quality control efforts. We saw earlier that was improving your SQ rating, but it's also helping your reject rates. If something is giving you benefits in more than one area, might that be a good place to put your money? Yeah. Best practices training. Here's another thing that's giving us more than one bang for our buck. The number of models, styles comprising the company's product line. The more models you produce, the less skillful your workers are going to be, the more rejects you're going to have. Once again, it's an optimization. I've got all these costs associated with having a higher number of models, but those might be worth it because of the extra consumers that I attract with my higher models. The use of new equipment as opposed to refurbished equipment. What do you think does a better job of making products perfect? A new machine or an old machine? The new machine. The technology is always improving, right? Even if you put the refurbished machine back to its as new configuration, it would still not be as accurate as a new machine because technology is constantly improving. And I can tell you that from personal experience, that we could hold tighter tolerances, meaning that our parts came out more the same size when we had a new machine versus if we got one of ours rebuilt. Whether production improvement option A has been installed, that option reduces the reject rate at a production facility by 50%. Studies indicate that it is possible to reduce facility reject rates to 1.5% or less, but it is left for company co-managers to determine what actions to take and how much to spend on driving those reject rates down. Once again, we are here at diminishing returns, right? And if you find yourself with 1.5% reject rate, do you think you should spend even more money to bring that down lower? No. Take that money and put it somewhere else. Deciding how many pairs to produce at each facility. The final entries on the branded production page concern how many pairs of branded footwear to produce at each facility. There is a line on the page showing the approximate number of branded pairs that will need to be produced to satisfy buyer demand. But the first time you visit this page, the number is only a first approximation because it is based on prior year levels of competitive effort exerted by both your company and rival companies. In other words, it would be true for last period. However, the forecast of the approximate number of pairs that need to be produced is updated each time. Number one, you make adjustments to your company's prices. If you raise your prices, what do you think is going to happen to the number of shoes that need to be made? They're going to go down, all else equal. Number two, you make changes to the assumed levels of competitive efforts of your rivals. And by the way, it's not just your prices, it's your advertising and other levels of competitive effort. And number two, you make changes in the assumed levels of competitive efforts of your rivals. So that's where you're trying to predict what your competitors will do. You will most certainly need to return to the branded footwear production page one or more times to adjust the total number of pairs to be produced and to consider how to best allocate production across facilities to minimize overall costs. It may make sense to make more of your shoes in Asia Pacific and less in North America. You can play around with where you're making these shoes to see what leads to the best net income for you. Does that make sense? Okay, production facilities. This decision page involves entries regarding number one, whether to purchase new or refurbished footwear making equipment. Number two, sell any unneeded footwear making equipment at one or more existing facilities. By the way, why do you think you would need to sell footwear equipment?
Sold.
Why would you need to sell it?
Because you're getting new stuff.
Okay, you could do that. You could do that. But typically, what happens is this. Students make some very bad decisions. And then what happens to the number of pairs that they're selling? Goes down. Do they need as much production capacity? No. Do they need cash? Yes. So what do they end up doing? Selling production machinery. Invest in production improvement options at one or more of the existing facilities. We'll get to those. Number 4, build new facilities in Latin America or Europe, Africa. By the way, guys, should you start immediately expanding? No, we talked about that, last time or the time before, right? Don't do that. Number 5, you could, instead of expanding in a new region, you could just construct more space in North America or Asia Pacific facilities so as to accommodate the installation of additional footwear making equipment in the following year. Now keep in mind, your facilities are not completely full. You can add equipment without building new buildings in the beginning. Purchasing new or refurbished equipment. Going into year 11, your company's North America facility has unused space. Companies have the option of installing new equipment at a cost of $5 million per $250,000 pairs of production capacity, or refurbished equipment at a cost of $3.6 million per $250,000 of production capacity. What will small thinkers always do? Which will they always go for there?
Refurbished.
Yeah, the refurbished. Oh yeah, we got to do that. It's cheaper. Might it be the right call? It might be. Is it obviously the right call just because the price is low? No. Go take a look at 2 cars. So this one car, the brand doesn't even exist anymore. I was in a bad way. When I got my first job out of college, my wife's car died as a result of some mechanic malpractice on my part. It's dead. I got to get her a new car. At the time, money's tight. And so I go around looking at cars, and it came down to 2 different cars. The Honda Civic or the Dodge Neon. The Dodge Neon was about $1,300 cheaper. What do you think I bought? Dodge Neon. It lasted about 50,000 miles before things started going seriously wrong. Would I have been better off to have gone with the Civic? Absolutely. And so you've got to be careful here. There may be a time when the refurbished equipment's the way to go, but it's not always the case. All equipment additions must be in increments of 250,000 pairs. Both types of equipment have a 10-year life. All equipment purchases can be made at the beginning of each year, and equipment suppliers can deliver and install the new refurbished equipment within 24 to 48 hours, thus making it available for the full production for the entire year. Is that a realistic assumption? Absolutely not. You can't even get the floor cleaned up right in the first 24 to 48 hours. Production facilities can be operated with whatever equipment is desired, all new, all refurbished, or any percentage combination of the 2. The original 4 million pairs of new equipment in North America facility was purchased at the beginning of year 5 and will be fully depreciated, scrapped at the beginning of year 15, assuming it was not sold off before year 15. At that time, you will need to decide if you want to replace it by purchasing new or refurbished equipment. I had some students, and they didn't recognize this, that they were going to have to replace some equipment, and so they sent me an email, and they're like, how come we didn't produce any shoes in year, what year would it be? 16. And I said, did you replace the equipment when it wore out? They're like, oh, we didn't know we had to do that. I guarantee you one team in here is going to do something like that. I won't publicly shame you, but you should definitely be ashamed of yourselves in private. The original 4 million pairs of refurbished equipment in the Asia Pacific facility was purchased at the beginning of year 6 and will likewise be fully depreciated at the beginning of year 16. Now, do you think most of the time people figure it out after the North America and then they do the right thing on the Asia Pacific? Yeah. You may replace the worn out equipment at the beginning of the year if you wish. What's going to happen, and I'm just asking, what's going to happen if you fail to replace your worn out equipment? You're not going to make any shoes. New equipment has 3 beneficial operating features not available with refurbished. Number 1, new equipment enables better quality control, thus increasing SQ ratings by 0.5 stars. So there's one of your benefits you're getting for that extra point or 1.4 million. New equipment operates at higher speeds so that worker productivity is increased by 500 pairs per year. So we've got additional productivity too. And number 3, the added quality control capabilities of new equipment reduces the reject rates on the pairs produced by 20%. Now I want to tell you about how quality control works in high volume manufacturing. The amount of time that it takes between the problem and discovering the problem is directly proportional to the costs you incur. And so if I had a new machine that could tell me immediately that the shoes coming out weren't quite right, I would immediately stop production and I wouldn't be producing a bunch of trash. But if I have refurbished equipment that doesn't have these sorts of sensors on them, and we do have sensors like this, vision sensors and whatnot, then the whole line just keeps pumping out crap until someone along the line says, hey man, we're getting nothing but left shoes. Right? Does that make sense? And so there's a benefit to having that sort of quality control equipment. Since these benefits apply only to pairs produced with new equipment, the size of these three benefits is proportional to the percentage of new equipment installed at a facility. All other things being equal, a facility with 100% new equipment will produce footwear with a 0.5 higher SQ rating, workforce productivity of 500 pairs per year higher, and a 20% lower reject rate than a facility installed with 100% refurbished. So, the more, how do I put this? It's, once again, it's an optimization. Does it look like there are lots of benefits to having new equipment? Yes. Are there multiple benefits to having new equipment? Yes. If I were making the call myself, and keep in mind, engineers like new machines, what would I buy? I'd buy the new equipment. Now, what if you don't have the money? If you can't raise the money, which we'll talk about, then maybe refurbished equipment is better than no equipment. Does that make sense? Kind of like when you're young, you buy used cars, but then eventually you get to where you buy new ones. Selling equipment installed at a company facility, you have the option at the beginning of each year to sell all or part of the footwear production equipment at a facility. They put the word facility in there twice for some reason. All sales are made in increments of 250,000 pairs and occur at the beginning of the year. All such sales are made at a price equal to the current book value of the equipment, with the oldest equipment always being sold first. What's going to have higher book value, older equipment or newer equipment? Yeah, the newer equipment. And so if you go out and sell off 250,000 pairs of capacity, you are going to get the least amount of money possible out of all your stuff because you're going to be selling your oldest, lowest book value equipment. Realized cash value of the sale will appear in the bottom section of the page on the line labeled book value of equipment sold. Book value of equipment sold. Now, in the real world, do we always sell equipment at book value? In fact, hardly ever do we sell at book value, but this is an assumption of the game. Production improvement options, finally. You may undertake one production improvement option per year at a given facility with a maximum of 2 production improvement options throughout the life of the facility. Did you guys catch that? You can only do 1 per year per factory, and you max out at 2 per factory. The cost of a production improvement option is treated as an additional investment. The improved equipment that is installed has a 10-year service life and is depreciated on a straight line basis at the rate of 10% annually. Production improvement options take effect in the year after they are initiated. So you spend the money on the production improvement, are you going to see those impacts in your current year results? No, you will see them next year. Production improvement options for a new facility cannot be ordered in the same year that construction of the new facility is initiated. So, when you build a new facility, it takes a year for that to come online, and at that point, you can put in your order for the improvement, and it will get done the following year. So we've got 4 options here. Option A, purchase special equipment to reduce the current reject rate by 50%. And then they tell you what it costs to do that. Option B is assembly layout revisions to reduce production run setup costs by 50%. Now, setup costs, remember, are they go along with the number of models. And so if your strategy calls for you to make a boatload of models, I would highly recommend option B. If you're running on a relatively few amount of models, it might not be as valuable for you. Option C, purchase special equipment to increase the SQ rating by 1 star. Now, keep in mind, do we have other ways to increase star rating? We absolutely do. Is it possible that they would be less expensive than this option? Yeah, and so you need to think about those things. Option D, purchase of robots to assist assembly and boost worker productivity by 50%. So option D is good for improving worker productivity. Approximate projections of the annual cost savings for each option at each facility are shown on the page. At each facility, the cost-saving benefits vary quite significantly, not only because of the current operating differences across the facilities, including reject rates models being produced, SQ ratings, worker productivity, and labor cost per pair assembled, but also because your company's management team may wish to compete differently in different geographic regions. It's possible to have different numbers of models and different SQ ratings in different geographic regions. Now, I'm going to point something out to you that most Americans don't know. If I say Mercedes in the US, are we talking a luxury car or a regular car? It's a luxury car. When you go to Germany, anyone here been to Germany? Did you ride in a taxi cab? What was it? It was a Mercedes! It's a flippin' Mercedes taxi cab! It turns out that in Germany, there are Mercedes at least sells models that are just considered regular ass cars, right? They're not luxury cars. And so your brand might be a luxury brand in South America, and it might be just a regular everyday brand in North America. It's totally up to you. By the way, the Mercedes that you rode in, did you notice if it had electric windows? It did? Oh, okay, so that's an improvement. First one that I rode in back in 1999. All right. Okay, let's see. So, let's talk about these things. If we talked about option B being good if you've got a lot of different models, when might option A be really good? Two different companies. One company has 10% reject rate, one company only has 2% reject rate. Which one would benefit more from option A? Yeah, the one with 10%. And so the benefit would be much greater for them there. So you can think through these things and think about which one's going to bring you the best benefit. Construction of new additional facility space. It's highly likely that your company will need to build additional facility space, listen to this, in upcoming years. Does that mean now? No. By the way, if you suck and your sales don't grow any, do you need to build new production facilities? No. Do you need to buy new equipment? Only to replace the equipment that's aging out, right? The construction of facility space in all regions takes 1 year to complete. The minimum space for a new facility and for expanding the space is 1 million pairs of footwear making equipment. Now, the facility doesn't include that. You're going to have to buy that too. The maximum initial size of a new production facility in a region where it currently has no production facility is space for 5 million pairs of footwear making equipment. Do you think you should hop in and build a 5 million pair plant right off the bat? Probably not. All costs for added facility space must be paid for in the year that the new construction or expansion is initiated. You're not going to get benefit of it until the next year, but you're going to have to pay for it this year. By the way, do you think you're probably going to have petty cash laying around to do this sort of thing? When people build a factory, do they usually fund it through internal equity, in other words, accumulated retained earnings? No, they're usually either issuing shares or they're borrowing money. I would hope that borrowing money would be the way you would go, and we'll explain why that is when we get to finance. Let's see. only up to a worldwide amount of facility space to accommodate 21 million pairs. So they're going to max you out. Total facility pairs up to 121 is 27.6% greater than the year 20 average total demand per company, and with maximum use of overtime just over 53% greater than the demand. So you're unlikely to need more than 21 million. So do you think you should be even pushing 21 million? Should that be in your plan? No, unless things just take off marvelously for you. A pop-up warning will appear if a decision entry to construct additional facility space violates any of the above policies. So they've got some policies from your board of directors, and if that comes up, it's a pop-up warning. You have to correct them to achieve compliance. Okay. Are there any questions about the things we talked about today? Where should you put your money? Things that bring you money or bring you benefit in only one area, or things that bring you benefit in multiple areas? Multiple. Is there more than one way to raise SQ? Yeah. Should you put all your money in one of those ways? No. Do the productivity improvement options. Should you think about the strategy you're pursuing before choosing to do those? Absolutely. Remember we said if you've got a high models, you'll want to use that one with the center production. Questions? Well, hopefully next time we will finish with this, and then we can get into chapter 14, so be prepared just in case.